everybody, Sam here again with 3D Printing Canada, and today was Bring Your Printer to Work Day. At least it was for me, so that I could do this video for you guys. This is my Ender 5 S1. I got it around Christmas. I'm sure I am one of hundreds of people who got one of these around Christmas time because we did have a really good sale going on them. But I've now been running it for about 6 months pretty continuously, and it was time for me to take it offline and do a little bit of a check and tune up on everything, make sure that everything's still running properly. It is just a regular maintenance thing that we should be doing with our printers. We wouldn't drive our car for 10 years without getting it checked. We shouldn't run our printer for too long without getting it checked. So I've brought it in, I snipped filament off, so I've still got a little tail hanging out, so that will be a good thing to take me through my first startup test. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn the printer on, make sure everything powers up properly. On this model, I do have a CR Touch, so when you first power it on, you should hear that CR Touch deploy. It's located at the back of this one, so you can't hear it, but it gives that little click, click sound as it deploys and retracts. That means that it is working properly. The next thing that we're going to want to make sure that we see is the screen light up, which it did. So now we need to heat it up so that I can pull out the filament that's left in it. On this model, we do that from the prepare screen. And we just go over to our temperature settings, set your nozzle temperature to, I like to go to 220. That way I know for sure my PLA gets nice and melted and is easy to pull out. If it was PETG, I would be doing 240. Anything over 210 for PLA, anything over 235 for PETG, and you'll be able to retract your filament. So that we can monitor where the temperature's at, we'll just go back to the home screen and it will show me that it's going up. I also want to keep an eye on it and make sure that that temperature is going up consistently. And we're going to stay with the printer so that we can listen for any possible errors. The main error you would hear at this point would be a thermal runaway error, and that would tell me that I need to start looking at my heater cartridge or thermistor. Looks like everything's going good for now. The other thing we can check while we're doing the temperature test is this up here is our heatsink cooling fan on this model. It has kicked in and started cooling, which means it's blowing air across the heatsink exactly the way it's supposed to be. This is a critical part. If it is not functioning, turn the printer off, get a replacement, and get a new one. If it's not working properly, none of the prints will work properly. All right, so we are up to temperature. I'm gonna go ahead and unload the filament. We've got all of this wonderful stringiness falling out the nozzle. That's just heat plus gravity. So to unload this one, I actually like to pull the Bowden tube out of the top, push back the tensioner lever, and then you push the filament down just a bit and pull it all the way out. You should get that nice blobby looking end on it, which is a good thing. It means that I didn't have anything crazy jammed in there, and I can pull it the rest of the way out of the Bowden tube. And we'll just seat that right back in there, clean this away from the nozzle so it doesn't stick. The next thing I want to test and make sure it's working properly is my filament runout sensor. That one's located just over here. You can see it's got a bit of a faint light in it right now, but when I put the filament through, it does actually turn on. So we're just engaging the switch, making sure the light comes on, and then we can pull it back out. That tells me my runout sensor is functioning properly. We good?
Yeah.
All right, now that I'm finished clearing out my hot end, I made sure that everything was flowing properly. I can go ahead and cool that down. So I'm gonna go back to my temperature settings, and I'll just set my nozzle temperature to 0. The next thing I wanna do is I wanna heat my build plate and make sure that it's heating properly and coming up to full temperature. For this test, I like to go to 80 degrees. I almost never heat it to 80 degrees for printing, but for testing purposes, it'll make sure that it can get all the way up there. Same idea, back at the home screen, we can track that temperature coming up. And while it's coming up, I can do the visual inspection of my build plate. So, here's the proof that I use it. This particular build plate started out as a textured polycarbonate. It's now a very smooth polycarbonate, and I've got filament sticking to it even when I don't necessarily want it to stick that well. There isn't anything that you can do about this except for replace the build plate, but it's so easy to do. So we take this one off, I head down to the storefront, I buy myself a new one, and with the new one, I can just pop it right on there. They cost around $35, And it's always good to have a couple of spares hanging around anyway, even if it's just so that you can start another print immediately while this one's cooling down. So we were able to get our build plate to come up to full printing temperature. I know for sure that it's getting hot, didn't have any problems along the way, so I can go ahead and cool that one down. Again, prepare, temperature settings, and we're just gonna set that to 0 as well. So now it's time to do the visual hardware inspection. We're gonna check all of the different parts of this printer. All right, now it's time for the all-over visual inspection of the machine. We're gonna start at the top because it's a wonderful place to start with anything. I want to double check that all of my cords, cables, and connections are seated properly into the ports that they're supposed to be in. Creality is very good about labeling everything, so you can make sure that the labels match to where they're supposed to be. I want to make sure all of my screws and accessories in my hot end are nice and tight. Make sure there's no wiggle or play in my fan shroud or my gantry. Make sure my Bowden tube is seated properly and it's not looking worn out or anything like that. This one should be okay for another couple of months before I have to go and change it. I want to power down the machine, and then I'll be able to test some gantry movement for it. So very carefully, at a reasonable, slow speed, let's make sure that we can move the X carriage all the way across the way that we are supposed to. We're not moving it too fast because doing this can absolutely generate current that can go back to the board. Very slowly, we just want to make sure that it moves freely. We're going to do the same thing with the Y carriage on this one. I'm going to go from both sides, move nice and slowly and carefully, and I'm definitely getting good movement there. I want to check my belt tension. You want to be sure that the belts have just a little bit of slack in them, just enough that you don't feel like you're trying to pluck a guitar string. That's not what we're going for on most of these belt-driven printers. So these ones are looking good. If I needed to adjust them, that's when it's time to find your belt tensioner and just slowly adjust it while checking the whole time to make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be. Another thing that I'm going to check is all of the palm wheels. I want to make sure that all of the palm wheels are sitting properly in their groove and don't have any buildup on them. I shouldn't be able to turn any of them without the whole gantry trying to move along with it. And, oh, there is a problem on this one. This wheel does have a little bit of a problem going on. A lot of people like to think that that's the actual wheel breaking down. That's really not the case. All that's happening here is the grease is coming out of the bearing and catching any of the dust that's in the air. So you can just carefully go ahead and wipe that off. I'll get in there with a Q-tip to make sure I get all of the little fluffies and fuzzies out. And then that wheel is still perfectly fine and good to keep using. Okay, so now that I've gone and cleaned all of the dirt and gook off of this palm wheel, I'll go ahead and continue checking stuff. And yeah, this one's nice and tight as well. So I do take pretty good care of my machines. I'm not surprised that I'm not finding any problems, but I have definitely seen machines come in where one of these wheels can just spin for days without the gantry moving. If you find yourself in that situation, that's when you're going to have to go ahead and get out a wrench and locate the eccentric nut. That is the only nut that you usually find on the palm wheel assemblies, and you just slowly turn and adjust until you can't spin the wheels freely anymore because the gantry wants to move with it. To test my Z gantry on this one, I am going to again slowly and carefully rotate this lead screw from down here at the flex coupling. That'll just tell me everything seems to be moving nice and clean and free for me. And we should be able to move it back up as well. As long as there's no resistance and all of your cables are plugged in properly, we should be good to go. So, last step in our wonderful inspection to make sure it's working properly, we're going to go ahead and power the machine on one more time. Okay, so now I just have to put it through its homing test and it is good to go. So we are going to go to the prepare screen. From the move axis option, I'm going to go ahead and select to home my Z axis. This is a touch screen, so it's as easy as just tapping on it. If you've got one of the older Ender 3s that has one of the turn knobs, you just scroll to the right one and press the turn knob. It will give you the option to home your axes individually. So I have a printer that is for sure ready to go and keep printing. This particular one, I'm going to go ahead and power it down, and I'm actually loaning it to a friend. That's why I brought it in to go through a tune-up on it before I lent it out to anybody else. So from here, it's time to prepare some G-code files and get to printing. I hope you guys found this helpful. If you like the content that we put out, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time with more tips and tricks for taking care of your printers.